Hi, scholars. My name is William Anderson, and again, I am the instructor for this communications class. Anytime you begin an academic study, it's always a good idea to clearly define the subject of that study. Since this course is going to be focusing on communication, today I want to make this video to help you understand what communication is. Now, communication is what we call an umbrella discipline. We call it that because it touches all the other subjects that we study. Communication is how we interact and relate to each other. It's how we create meanings. Now, I recently read a study that found 122 distinctly different definitions for this word communication. And some of them are very, very broad. For example, in the natural sciences, they defined communication as an organism's response to a stimulus. Well, that's incredibly broad and far beyond our purposes here for this course. So the definition that I chose to use for this class is from one of the foremost experts in communication today, a lady named Sarah Trenholm. Dr. Trenholm defined communication as the process whereby humans collectively create and regulate social reality. Now that we have our definition, the next step is we're going to be looking at some of the important implications for using this definition. Implication number one is that we're going to be looking at communication as a process. Now that's a key word. Any subject of inquiry can be defined as either a thing, which means that it's static and unchanging, or a process, which means that it's dynamic and changing. Now, when we think of a thing or a process, one way to look at the difference is to think about how you would study a river, like the Willamette River here in Oregon. If you wanted to study a river as a thing, you might take a bucket, fill it with river water, and study that water. This water, as it's unchanging, it's all the same water, we get a snapshot of the river. If you wanted to study the river as a process, you would be looking at how it's dynamic and changing over time. So, for example, you might be looking at how the river changes through the seasons with the temperature changes, how the life changes, then through soil erosion, how the shape of the river changes and the current speed changes. In terms of communication, if we wanted to look at communication as a thing, we might analyze, say, a particular speech, or a music video, or a movie. Instead, we're looking at it as a process. We want to see how our relationships, our perceptions, our beliefs, our ideas are changed and transformed over time through these interactions with other people. Implication number two probably won't surprise any of you. This course is going to be focusing on human communication. Now, there are areas of communication that are growing very, very quickly that are outside of this area. For example, something called HCI, or Human Computer Interface. This is a fascinating course of study, and it looks at how humans interact and communicate with machines. As technology continues to develop, we're going to see some radical changes in how we communicate with machines and how machines or computers communicate with us. But our focus here is going to be on how we communicate with each other. Implication number three, the focus is going to be on collective communication. In other words, communication as a collective endeavor. The vast majority of our communication is actually with ourselves. It's something called intrapersonal communication, and we'll be talking a little bit more about that in the next video. Intrapersonal communication is our internal dialogue, how we talk to ourselves, daydreaming, night dreaming, as well as neurological communication. But while the vast majority of our communication is with ourselves, we're going to be focusing on communication as a collective endeavor, that it is through our shared conversations, our shared communication, that we create these social meanings. Finally, implication number four, and this is the trickiest of the four. Through communication, we create and regulate social reality. Now, some of you will pick up on this very easily, while others might struggle. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to explain this concept, and then I want to tell you about a couple of different theories or ideas that you can go and research to have a better understanding of what it is we're talking about. Finally, there is a great TED Talk here on the middle page from a neuroscientist named Uri Hassan. He's a Princeton neuroscientist, and he will show you and explain to you through his lab research how this is happening. So first, what does this concept even mean? Many of the truths that we cling to, the things that we believe to be objective reality, were actually taught to us. Through socialization, in other words, our parents and our family, television, etc., teaching us certain ideas, it caused our brain to accept certain things to be true. Then, as we made observations of the things around us, our brain naturally interpreted those observations to confirm what it is the brain already believed. Psychologists refer to this as the confirmation bias. So, an example. Many of you are sports fans. And as sports fans, you've probably heard of something called the hot hand, or being in the zone. For those of you not familiar with this concept, what it means to be in the zone or having the hot hand is that everything you try seems to work. For example, in basketball, if somebody has the hot hand, every single shot they take seems to be made. Conversely, if they have the cold hand, they can't even make a layup. Well, starting in the 1980s, statisticians have shown that this is actually not true. It's a collective illusion. We were taught that it was true, and then we interpreted our observations to confirm its truth, even though it isn't true at all. Now, the first statisticians that I'm aware of that looked at this was in the early 1980s. In 1982, the Philadelphia 76ers, a professional basketball team out of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, were the first professional sports team to catalog the outcome of every possession. Now, the 76ers had three very streaky players on their team: Moses Malone, Andrew Toney, and Maurice Cheeks. Maurice Cheeks might be a familiar name to some of you because later he would become the coach of the Portland Trail Blazers. When each of these players had the hot hand, it seemed like every shot they took would go in. They couldn't miss. So the statisticians looked at players when they had the hot hand, which they interpreted as having made 3 consecutive shots, and they wanted to find out how strong is this hot hand? How much more likely are they to make the ensuing shots? What they found surprised them. The shooting percentage of a player with a hot hand on the ensuing shots was actually below their season average. In other words, having the hot hand, their shooting performance went down. They then looked at when players would have the cold hand. For them, the ensuing shots actually were above their season average. Now, this went against the collective understanding of professional sports fans throughout the country. The idea that the hot hand actually led to lower shooting and the cold hand led to higher shooting was not only different than what we believed, it contradicted it. Many sports analysts and coaches would respond with things like, "I don't need some stupid statistician to tell me what I see. I know what I see." But it wasn't true. How is that possible? Well, when the player with the hot hand made the next shots, it was seen as confirmation that the hot hand was real. If they missed the following shots, we didn't say, the hot hand must not be real. Instead, we would ignore the observation. We would say the hot hand is over. Well, if the observations that confirm your belief are counted and the observations that don't are seen as irrelevant because the hot hand is now over, obviously our perception becomes our reality. So that's how through communication we create social reality. The other part of this implication is that we regulate reality. The regulation of social reality basically means that we take ownership of it. We decide what is good and bad, what is right and wrong. We even take upon ourselves the right to decide what can be included in that social reality. We see this a lot in our country today, where ideas or beliefs or viewpoints that go against what we believe are shouted down. There's an effort to try to make it to where conflicting ideas are not even allowed to be communicated. This is an effort to try to wipe that away from reality, to make it as if it's not part of our reality. Now, I mentioned earlier in the video that there's a great TED Talk here that will help explain some of this. Now, we've already talked about the two theories or ideas that you can read more about, the social construction of reality and what psychologists refer to as the confirmation bias. The video that I want you to watch is the TED Talk from Uri Hassan called Your Brain on Communication. You'll be able to see a link here on the Moodle page to find it. Now, the video is about 14 or 15 minutes long, and I encourage you to actually watch it twice. There are some important concepts that I want you to pay particular attention to. First of all, the concept of coupling. When Dr. Hassan refers to coupling, he's talking about two people who are communicating with each other. When you communicate with another person, neuroscientists refer to this as your brains coupling together. The second concept that I want you to pay close attention to is when Dr. Hassan talks about neural entrainment. Neural entrainment, when you are communicating an idea to another person, their brain begins to fire in a similar pattern to how your brain is firing, and he will show you from his lab this occurring. Remember this important concept from neuroscience. Neurons that fire together wire together. And it shows how through communication, a person's brain is actually being wired to be similar to the person that they're communicating with. Dr. Hassan, in the later minutes of that video, does an excellent job of explaining some of the important implications of this. He gives some examples of how literally somebody's perception of reality is shaped or changed based upon one small word or small phrase, and how the communication of that word or phrase completely transforms how somebody perceives something. So that's the definition that we're going to be using for communication. And please understand this, watch those videos, and I will see you at the next video. Thank you very much.